The ripped pieces of Jasmine Walker's ID flutter to the floor of the first-class cabin. The white pilot's smirk vanishes as she rises from her seat, all 6 feet of her, and reveals the gleaming FBI badge. "This flight is now under federal investigation," she announces. The cabin falls silent. Before we dive deeper into this shocking confrontation, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination in public, and subscribe to catch more true stories of justice being served. Now, let's rewind to see how this powerful moment came to be. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the FBI field office in Atlanta as Jasmine Walker strode through the hallway, her confident steps echoing against the polished floor. At 32, she had already distinguished herself as one of the Bureau's most effective agents, known for her sharp instincts and unwavering composure under pressure. Today, however, even her steady nerves felt slightly rattled. "Agent Walker, please take a seat," Director Harrison said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. His expression was grave, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. "I've selected you personally for this assignment." Jasmine nodded, her dark eyes focused as she accepted the file he slid across the desk. Inside were dozens of complaints filed against MidAir Airlines, all sharing a disturbing pattern. "Racial profiling?" Jasmine asked, though she already knew the answer as she flipped through the documents. "Exactly. MidAir has faced 27 formal complaints in the past year alone. Black passengers bumped from flights despite confirmed reservations. Random security checks that somehow only target people of color. First-class passengers being relocated or questioned about their tickets." Harrison leaned forward. "And yet, they claim all these incidents are isolated, that there's no pattern." Jasmine felt a familiar knot in her stomach, one that had formed years ago when she was 12, watching her father being pulled aside at airport security while white families walked by unbothered. That knot had propelled her through law school and into the FBI. "We need hard evidence," Harrison continued. "An undercover operation. You'll pose as Jasmine Walker, tech executive, taking multiple first-class flights operated by this man." He pointed to a photograph of a pilot with silver-streaked hair and cold blue eyes. "Thomas Reynolds. Flight attendants have nicknamed him the Gatekeeper. Off the record, several have suggested he's the worst offender, but they're afraid of losing their jobs if they come forward officially." Jasmine studied the man's face, memorizing every feature. "I'll be booking flights he pilots specifically." "Correct. Intelligence suggests he targets black women in first class most frequently. The airline's internal records show a statistically impossible pattern of seating adjustments on his flights." For the next 3 hours, Jasmine absorbed every detail of her cover identity: Jasmine Walker, successful tech consultant for a Silicon Valley firm, traveling for business meetings. She would carry authentic-looking business cards, a high-end laptop with fabricated company files, and dress the part of a wealthy executive. Later that afternoon, she met with Agent Carlos Diaz, who would be her handler throughout the operation. "I'll be monitoring remotely," Carlos explained, showing her the specialized equipment. "This looks like a normal smartwatch, but it records audio and has a panic button. These earrings contain microcameras." Jasmine held the delicate silver jewelry, marveling at the technology hidden within. "And if Reynolds takes the bait? We document everything and build an airtight case." Carlos paused, his expression softening. "Look, Jasmine, I know this type of assignment hits close to home. Having to deliberately put yourself in a position to be discriminated against, it's not easy." That night, alone in her apartment, Jasmine stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Tomorrow, she would board the first of several flights, knowing, even expecting, to be treated as less than. The thought sent a chill through her body. In her years at the FBI, she'd faced armed suspects and high-stakes negotiations, but something about this assignment felt more personally devastating. She would have to swallow her pride, appear vulnerable, all while maintaining her cover. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carlos, "First flight booked." ATL to ORD, first class, Reynolds confirmed as pilot. You ready? Jasmine took a deep breath and typed back, ready. But as she climbed into bed, doubts swirled through her mind. Was she really prepared to face the kind of discrimination she had spent her entire career fighting against? And could she maintain her composure when it happened? The answer would come sooner than she expected. The gleaming expanse of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport bustled with early morning travelers as Jasmine wheeled her designer luggage toward the premium check-in counter. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a tailored navy suit, subtle gold jewelry, and leather pumps that had cost more than her first month's rent as a rookie agent. Every detail of her appearance had been calculated to project success and belonging in first class. Still, she noticed the subtle shifts in behavior as she approached the premium line. The white businessman ahead of her received a warm, "Good morning, sir," while the attendant's smile tightened when Jasmine stepped forward. "Membership card and ID?" the attendant asked, her tone noticeably cooler. Jasmine presented her documents with a pleasant smile. "I'm flying first class to Chicago." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly as she examined the ticket. "And this is your ticket?" "Yes," Jasmine replied calmly, though she felt her heartbeat quicken. "I fly MidAir frequently for business." The attendant's fingers tapped rapidly on her keyboard. "It seems there might be an issue with your reservation. Let me just double-check a few things." Jasmine glanced behind her, noticing the white woman who had joined the line after her was already being assisted by another agent, with no questions about her ticket's legitimacy. "Actually," Jasmine said, her voice pleasant but firm, "I confirmed my reservation yesterday. Is there a specific issue you're seeing in the system?" After several more minutes of verification, Jasmine was finally issued her boarding pass, the attendant never quite meeting her eyes. As she made her way toward security, Jasmine subtly adjusted her earring, ensuring the camera was properly positioned. She whispered under her breath, knowing Carlos would be listening. First interaction documented. Premium check-in agent questioned legitimacy of my first-class ticket. Delayed processing by approximately 7 minutes compared to white passengers. At the security checkpoint, Jasmine wasn't surprised when she was pulled aside for random additional screening, while observing multiple white travelers pass through unimpeded. She maintained her composed demeanor while TSA agents examined her belongings with exaggerated thoroughness. In the first-class lounge, a new indignity awaited. As Jasmine settled into a plush chair with her laptop, an older white woman approached her. "Excuse me," the woman said, her diamond rings catching the light as she gestured. "The restroom needs attention. Paper towels are running low." Jasmine looked up slowly. "I don't work here. I'm a passenger." The woman's face flushed pink. "Oh. I just assumed, well, I'm sorry." She hurried away without further acknowledgement. Jasmine sent Carlos another message, mistaken for cleaning staff in first-class lounge despite business attire. Recording continuous. When boarding was announced, Jasmine joined the first-class line, ignoring the suspicious glances from fellow passengers. As she approached the jet bridge, she got her first in-person glimpse of Thomas Reynolds. He stood tall in his pilot's uniform, greeting passengers with practiced charm. "Welcome aboard, sir, enjoy your flight," he said warmly to the elderly white man ahead of Jasmine. When Jasmine presented her boarding pass, Reynolds' smile vanished. His eyes flicked from her face to her ticket and back again. "First class?" he asked, his tone implying a question where there should have been none. "Yes," Jasmine replied simply, meeting his gaze. Reynolds gave a curt nod and said nothing further, not offering the same welcome he'd given to other passengers. As Jasmine moved past him, she felt his eyes tracking her. On board, a flight attendant named Sarah Jenkins guided passengers to their seats. When she reached Jasmine, a flicker of what looked like sympathetic discomfort crossed her face. "Here you are, Ms. Walker. 2A, can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" "Sparkling water would be lovely, thank you," Jasmine replied, settling into the spacious seat. She couldn't help but notice that Sarah's interaction with her seemed cautious, almost nervous, compared to her easy banter with other first-class passengers. Something in the flight attendant's expression suggested she was already anticipating trouble. Jasmine's suspicion was confirmed when she overheard Reynolds speaking to Sarah in hushed tones near the galley. "Who approved that booking?" he asked, nodding subtly toward Jasmine's seat. "It's a standard first-class reservation, Captain," Sarah replied, her voice professional but tight. "Everything's in order." Reynolds frowned. "We'll see about that." As the cabin door closed and preparations for departure began, Jasmine felt a growing tension in the air. The investigation had barely begun, and already Reynolds was showing signs of the discrimination they suspected. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself for what promised to be a challenging flight. The real test was yet to come. An hour into the flight, the cabin had settled into the rhythmic hum of travel. Most first-class passengers had been served their requested beverages and morning snacks. All except Jasmine. 3 times she had caught Sarah Jenkins' eye, and 3 times the flight attendant had nodded in acknowledgement before attending to other passengers. Now, after watching the attendant serve the white businessman beside her a second scotch without him even asking, Jasmine pressed her call button. The soft chime echoed in the cabin. Minutes passed. The call button remained unanswered. Jasmine pressed it again. This time, instead of Sarah, Captain Reynolds himself emerged from the cockpit, his posture rigid as he strode down the aisle toward her seat. A hush fell over the first-class cabin. "Is there a problem here?" Reynolds asked, his voice carrying just enough to ensure other passengers could hear. "I pressed the call button to request a drink," Jasmine explained calmly. "Twice." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "The flight attendants are quite busy. I'm sure they'll get to you when they can." "Everyone else in first class has been served," Jasmine pointed out, gesturing to the businessman beside her who was now nursing his second drink. "Some twice." From her peripheral vision, Jasmine noticed several passengers had begun to pay attention to the interaction. A young white woman across the aisle had discreetly taken out her phone, pointing it in their direction. "Ms. Walker, is it?" Reynolds said, glancing at the passenger manifest in his hand. "There seems to be a situation we need to address." "What situation?" Jasmine asked. "A security concern," Reynolds replied vaguely. "May I see your identification again?" "I showed my ID at boarding," Jasmine said, maintaining eye contact. "Is there a specific reason you need to verify it mid-flight?" "Airline policy," Reynolds stated flatly. "I have the authority to verify passenger identification at any time." Jasmine looked pointedly at the businessman next to her. "Are you asking all passengers for their identification?" "Ma'am," Reynolds' voice took on an edge of authority, "I'm not going to ask again." The businessman shifted uncomfortably in his seat but said nothing. More phones had appeared, recording the escalating confrontation. Jasmine reached for her purse and removed her ID. As she handed it to Reynolds, she subtly adjusted her watch, ensuring it was recording the interaction. "This is a standard security procedure," Reynolds announced to the now attentive cabin, though no one had asked. "Nothing to be concerned about." Sarah Jenkins had appeared at the edge of the galley, watching the interaction with visible discomfort. Her hands fidgeted with a cocktail napkin, twisting it anxiously. Reynolds studied Jasmine's ID with exaggerated scrutiny, holding it up to the light and examining each security feature as if he were a document expert rather than a pilot. "This says you're a technology consultant," he remarked. "That's correct," Jasmine replied. "And what exactly do you consult on?" "Digital transformation and enterprise solutions," Jasmine answered smoothly, using the terminology from her cover identity. "I'm heading to Chicago for a client meeting." Reynolds continued his interrogation. "You fly first class often?" "Yes, for work." "On whose expense account?" The implications behind his questions were clear to everyone listening. Jasmine maintained her composure, though she felt a familiar anger rising within her, the same anger she'd felt countless times when facing prejudice. "Captain Reynolds," she said evenly, "I'm curious why my travel arrangements warrant this level of questioning. Is there an actual security concern you'd like to share?" Reynolds' jaw tightened. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "Your job is flying the aircraft," Jasmine pointed out. "Not interrogating passengers who have already cleared security and boarding procedures." A few seats away, an older woman whispered loudly to her companion, "Why is he only questioning her?" Reynolds ignored the comment. "I'll be keeping this for further verification," he said, pocketing Jasmine's ID. "You don't have the authority to confiscate a passenger's identification," Jasmine stated, her training as an FBI agent bleeding through her cover persona. "Actually, as captain of this aircraft, I have broad discretion regarding security matters," Reynolds retorted. "If you have a problem with that, you can file a complaint when we land." As he turned to leave, Jasmine added, "I'd like to speak with another crew member, please." Reynolds paused, his back stiffening. When he turned around, the veneer of professional concern had slipped, revealing a flash of genuine anger. "Ms. Walker," he said, voice low and threatening, "I suggest you stop creating a disturbance, or we may need to take more serious measures upon landing." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Sarah Jenkins looked as though she wanted to intervene but remained frozen in place. The businessman beside Jasmine suddenly became intensely interested in the safety card in his seatback pocket. As Reynolds returned to the cockpit, Jasmine discreetly checked her watch, confirming it was still recording. This confrontation was building exactly as the FBI had anticipated, but even knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier to endure. The real test of her composure was yet to come, and Jasmine knew that Reynolds was far from finished with her. 20 minutes of uncomfortable silence passed. Passengers in first class exchanged furtive glances, the atmosphere charged with tension. Jasmine sat perfectly still, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the humiliation she'd just endured. She finally received her requested sparkling water when Sarah Jenkins hurriedly placed it on her tray table, her eyes conveying an unspoken apology. "Is there anything else I can get you, Ms. Walker?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, thank you," Jasmine replied. "But I would like my ID returned." Sarah's eyes darted toward the cockpit. "I'll see what I can do." Before she could move away, the cockpit door opened again. Captain Reynolds emerged with Jasmine's ID still in his hand, his expression now set in grim determination. Whatever internal debate he might have had was clearly resolved, and not in Jasmine's favor. He approached her seat with deliberate steps, towering over her. "Ms. Walker, after further examination, I have concerns about this identification." "What concerns specifically?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady. Reynolds held up the ID where others could see it. "This doesn't appear to be an authentic government-issued identification." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and explicit. Several passengers gasped audibly. "That's a standard Georgia driver's license," Jasmine stated. "If you have specific concerns about its authenticity, I'd like to hear them." Reynolds' lips curled into a slight smirk. "People like you often present fraudulent documentation. It's a known issue." The racial implication of "people like you" caused an immediate reaction throughout the cabin. The young woman across the aisle lowered her phone in shock. The businessman next to Jasmine shifted uncomfortably, looking between her and the pilot. "Would you care to clarify what you mean by people like me?" Jasmine asked, her tone deceptively calm. Reynolds ignored the question. "This ID has inconsistent coloring on the state seal, and the holographic overlay doesn't reflect light correctly. Those are standard security features of a Georgia license," Jasmine countered. "I assure you, my identification is legitimate." "I've made my determination," Reynolds declared. Then, in a move that stunned everyone watching, He gripped the ID with both hands and deliberately tore it in half. The sound of tearing plastic cut through the cabin like a gunshot. Pieces of Jasmine's ID fluttered to the floor as collective gasps erupted from the passengers. "What are you doing?" Jasmine demanded, genuine shock in her voice. Even knowing Reynolds' history, she hadn't expected such a brazen act. "Confiscating fraudulent documentation," Reynolds announced loudly. "As captain, I have the authority to do so for security purposes." "You've destroyed my personal property and government-issued identification," Jasmine said, fighting to keep her voice level. "That's not confiscation, that's destruction of property." Reynolds leaned closer. "You have two options, Ms. Walker. You can move to an economy seat for the remainder of the flight, or you can be removed and detained at our next stop. Your choice." The cabin had gone completely silent. Even the ambient noise of the aircraft seemed muted in the wake of this shocking escalation. What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position? Comment number 1 if you think she should stand her ground, or number 2 if you think she should comply to avoid further confrontation. This is exactly the kind of racial discrimination that happens every day across America, often when no cameras are rolling. Hit that like button if you believe accountability is necessary, and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. As tension filled the cabin, every passenger now faced a moral choice. Speak up or remain silent in the face of blatant discrimination. Would anyone stand beside Jasmine, or would they all look away? And what recourse did she have now that her identification had been literally torn apart? The situation was spiraling toward a breaking point that would change everyone on that flight forever. As the torn pieces of Jasmine's ID lay scattered on the cabin floor, a moment of stunned silence enveloped the first-class section. Reynolds stood triumphant, clearly believing he had established his authority beyond question. But the atmosphere was shifting. Sarah Jenkins disappeared into the crew area, her face flushed with what appeared to be shame and distress. Through the narrow galley opening, Jasmine could see her engaged in intense, whispered conversation with another flight attendant. "This is completely unacceptable," a voice declared, breaking the silence. All heads turned toward an elderly white woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, seated across the aisle. She removed her reading glasses and fixed Reynolds with a stern gaze that suggested decades of suffering no fools. "I've been watching this entire interaction," she continued, her voice carrying the weight of authority that came with age, "and I've never witnessed such unprofessional behavior from airline staff in my 60 years of flying." Reynolds' composure faltered momentarily before he regained his commanding demeanor. "Ma'am, this is a security matter that doesn't concern, it absolutely concerns me," the woman interrupted. "I'm a retired judge, Captain Reynolds. Judge Patricia Montgomery. And what I've witnessed is a clear violation of this young woman's civil rights." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Reynolds' face hardened. "With all due respect, Judge, you don't understand the security protocols." "I understand the law," Judge Montgomery countered, "and I understand the difference between security protocols and harassment. I will be happy to testify to that effect if necessary." Reynolds dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. "We have procedures that involve destroying government-issued identification," came another voice, deep and resonant. A black businessman had risen from his seat in business class and now stood at the dividing curtain. He wore an impeccably tailored suit and carried himself with unmistakable confidence. "Anthony Washington," he introduced himself. "I'm an aviation attorney, and I'm quite familiar with FAA regulations. Nothing authorizes the destruction of a passenger's identification." Reynolds' face darkened. "Sir, return to your seat immediately or you'll be joining Ms. Walker in being removed from this flight." "Are you threatening me now, Captain?" Washington asked calmly, taking out his phone. "I'd be interested to know if your airline's legal department would support that position." More passengers had begun to voice their concerns. A college student openly filmed the confrontation. A middle-aged couple whispered furiously to each other before the husband stood up. "My wife and I are both physicians," he announced. "We've flown with MidAir for 20 years and never seen anything like this. We'll be canceling our loyalty memberships after witnessing this treatment." Jasmine remained composed, observing as the dynamic shifted. This wasn't just about her anymore. Reynolds' actions had crossed a line that even neutral bystanders couldn't ignore. While some passengers still averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved, an impromptu coalition of support had formed around her. Amidst this growing resistance, Jasmine's watch vibrated subtly against her wrist. A text message from Carlos: "Operation secure. Sufficient evidence obtained. Stand by for extraction protocol." Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins had returned to the cabin, her posture noticeably different, straighter, more determined. As she passed Jasmine's seat, she discreetly dropped a folded cocktail napkin onto her tray table. Jasmine carefully unfolded it to read the hastily scrawled message: "I have evidence too, years of it. Not just him. Others. Will help." Reynolds, seeing the growing dissent, changed tactics. "If everyone could please remain calm and seated," he announced in his authoritative captain's voice. "I've contacted ground security. There will be air marshals meeting us upon arrival to handle this situation properly." What Reynolds didn't know was that the actual air marshal on the flight, a quietly observant man seated in business class, had been watching the entire scene unfold with professional interest. When Reynolds mentioned air marshals, the man's eyebrows raised slightly. He rose from his seat and approached the first-class cabin, showing his credentials discreetly to a flight attendant. "Federal Air Marshal," he said quietly. "What's the situation here?" Reynolds seized what he thought was an ally. "Marshal, we have an uncooperative passenger with fraudulent identification. She's creating a disturbance." The air marshal surveyed the scene, his trained eyes taking in the torn ID, the recording passengers, and Jasmine's composed demeanor. "Ma'am," he addressed Jasmine, "could I speak with you briefly?" "Of course," Jasmine replied calmly. They moved to a relatively private corner of the galley. Once out of earshot, the marshal studied her closely. "You're not just a civilian, are you?" he asked quietly. Jasmine met his gaze steadily. "Eagle Protocol Indigo," she responded with the coded phrase that federal agents use to identify themselves to other law enforcement without blowing their cover. The air marshal's expression shifted subtly with recognition. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Understood. How do you want to play this?" "Let it continue for now," Jasmine replied softly. "We're gathering evidence." He nodded again and returned to the cabin, addressing Reynolds. "I don't see any immediate security threat, Captain. I'll continue to monitor the situation, but I don't believe intervention is necessary at this time." Reynolds' face flushed with anger and confusion. This wasn't going according to his plan. The passengers were turning against him, the air marshal wasn't cooperating, and even his own flight attendant seemed to be undermining his authority. As the flight began its initial descent into Chicago, the power dynamic had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a routine case of discrimination, one Reynolds had apparently enacted countless times before, was unraveling in real time. Jasmine knew the most critical moment was yet to come, but for the first time, she saw genuine uncertainty in Reynolds' eyes. The silent allies had found their voices, and Reynolds was beginning to realize he might have chosen the wrong target this time. The captain's announcement to prepare for landing did nothing to dispel the tension that had engulfed the first-class cabin. Reynolds had retreated to the cockpit, but not before instructing the flight attendants to keep an eye on the situation. Sarah Jenkins moved through the cabin with determined efficiency, her earlier nervousness replaced by quiet resolve. As she helped passengers secure their belongings for landing, Sarah paused beside Jasmine. "He's radioed ahead," she whispered, adjusting Jasmine's tray table. "Airport security will be meeting the plane." "Thank you," Jasmine replied softly. The air marshal had positioned himself strategically at the front of the business class section, maintaining a clear view of the entire situation while appearing casual to untrained eyes. Judge Montgomery, now fully invested in Jasmine's cause, had moved to sit in the empty seat beside her, abandoned by a businessman who had quietly requested to be relocated away from the disruption. "My dear," the judge said, her voice low, "I want you to know I've documented everything. Been taking notes since this began." She patted her elegant leather notebook. "Old habits die hard. 30 years on the bench taught me to record everything." Anthony Washington, the aviation attorney, had been busily typing on his phone. He leaned forward from the row behind. "I've contacted MidAir's chief counsel directly. We've worked together on industry regulations. He's disturbed by what I've described." Jasmine thanked them both while maintaining her cover. "I appreciate your support. This has been humiliating." "Humiliating by design," Judge Montgomery observed sharply. "This wasn't random. The captain targeted you specifically." As the aircraft began its final approach, the seatbelt signs illuminated. Sarah made one last pass through the cabin, her eyes meeting Jasmine's briefly, communicating silent support. The intercom crackled to life. "This is Captain Reynolds speaking. Upon landing, I must ask all passengers to remain seated until further notice. We have a security situation that will be addressed by ground personnel. This won't take long if everyone cooperates." The implications were clear. Reynolds was still planning to have Jasmine removed. What he didn't know was that Jasmine had already sent a coded text to Carlos, "Protocol Sunrise initiated. Touchdown in 15. Protocol Sunrise was FBI shorthand for an undercover agent preparing to reveal their identity. Carlos would have already coordinated with the Chicago field office to ensure the right personnel would be waiting. As the plane touched down with a gentle thud and taxied toward the gate, Jasmine felt a strange calm settle over her. The hours of degradation and discrimination she had endured were about to serve their purpose. The aircraft came to a complete stop. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reynolds' voice came through the speakers again, "as I mentioned, we have security personnel boarding to address a situation with a passenger. Please remain seated." Sarah Jenkins stood at the front of the cabin, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She caught Jasmine's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The main cabin door opened, and two uniformed officers stepped aboard. They were not airport security as Reynolds had likely expected, but rather wore the distinctive insignia of federal agents. Jasmine recognized Agent Michaela Torres from the Chicago field office, though she gave no indication of familiarity. Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, straightening his uniform as he approached the officers with confident strides. "Thank you for responding so quickly," he said, extending his hand. "We have a passenger with fraudulent identification who's been causing a disturbance." "Where is this passenger, sir?" Agent Torres asked professionally. "Right this way," Reynolds said, gesturing toward Jasmine with undisguised satisfaction. This woman presented suspicious identification, refused to comply with crew instructions, and has been disruptive throughout the flight. The federal agents followed Reynolds down the aisle, stopping in front of Jasmine's seat. Judge Montgomery sat protectively beside her, while Anthony Washington watched intently from behind. "Ma'am," Agent Torres addressed Jasmine formally, "the captain has raised some serious concerns." "He destroyed my identification," Jasmine replied calmly, gesturing to the torn pieces that she had collected from the floor. "She was using a fake ID," Reynolds interjected. "As captain, I have the authority to confiscate fraudulent documents." "By tearing them up?" the second agent asked skeptically. "It was necessary to ensure it couldn't be used again," Reynolds insisted, his confidence beginning to waver slightly under the agent's questioning gaze. "I see," Agent Torres said neutrally. She turned back to Jasmine. "Ma'am, could you please stand and identify yourself?" This was the moment, the culmination of the operation and Jasmine's chance to reclaim her dignity after hours of deliberate humiliation. Jasmine rose from her seat slowly, standing at her full height, 6 feet of composed, professional authority. She reached into her jacket and removed a slim leather wallet. The cabin watched in stunned silence as she flipped it open to reveal a gleaming gold badge. Special Agent Jasmine Walker, Federal Bureau of Investigation, she announced, her voice carrying throughout the now silent cabin. Captain Reynolds, this flight and your airline are now under federal investigation for civil rights violations and systematic discrimination. The color drained from Reynolds' face as the realization of what had just happened crashed over him. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound. You're. He finally stammered. An FBI agent conducting an undercover investigation into patterns of racial discrimination on commercial airlines, Jasmine completed for him. And you, Captain, have provided us with exceptional evidence. Several passengers broke into spontaneous applause. Judge Montgomery smiled with satisfied vindication. Anthony Washington nodded approvingly. Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, clutching a small USB drive in her trembling hand. Agents, she said, her voice shaky but determined, I have documentation. 3 years of incidents. Names, dates, patterns. Not just Captain Reynolds. It's systematic. Reynolds found his voice again. This is entrapment. You can't, this is not entrapment, Captain, Jasmine corrected him professionally. This was an authorized investigation based on numerous prior complaints. You weren't induced to discriminate against me, you chose to do so, as you've apparently chosen to do with many passengers before me. Agent Torres addressed the shaken pilot. Captain Reynolds, please gather your personal belongings. You'll be coming with us for questioning. As Reynolds was escorted toward the exit, the reality of his situation visibly crashed over him. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all now hanging in the balance because he couldn't resist the urge to exercise his prejudice one more time. Jasmine turned to address the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. This investigation is ongoing, and some of you may be contacted as witnesses. Those who recorded today's events, your cooperation would be greatly appreciated. As the passengers began to disembark, many stopped to express support or share their contact information. The elderly judge squeezed Jasmine's hand and whispered, beautifully executed, Agent Walker. I haven't enjoyed a revelation this much since my courtroom days. Jasmine smiled in response, but beneath her professional exterior, a complex mixture of emotions churned. The victory felt important but incomplete. One discriminatory captain would face consequences, but the system that enabled him remained largely intact. As she followed the other agents off the aircraft, Jasmine knew this was just the beginning of a much larger battle for justice. While Reynolds was being escorted from the aircraft, a commotion erupted near the cockpit. The co-pilot, a younger man named Brian Hoffman, had emerged and was arguing vehemently with Agent Torres. You can't just remove the captain of an aircraft. There are regulations, procedures. Hoffman protested, his face flushed with indignation. Jasmine stepped forward, her FBI credentials still visible. The aircraft has landed safely, and passengers are disembarking. Captain Reynolds is being detained for questioning, not arrested at this time. Hoffman's eyes darted between Jasmine and Reynolds, who was now standing near the exit with the second agent. This is outrageous. You're disrupting airline operations based on what? A customer service complaint. Civil rights violations, Jasmine corrected firmly. Federal offenses. The commotion had halted the disembarkation process, with passengers clustering in the aisles, many still filming the unfolding drama. MidAir's ground staff had begun to gather at the aircraft door, alerted by the unusual situation. Reynolds saw an opportunity in the confusion. Brian, he called to the co-pilot, contact corporate legal immediately. This is a setup, they're trying to make an example of me. A MidAir executive in a sharp suit pushed his way onto the aircraft. What's happening here? I'm Daniel Phillips, Regional Operations Director. Your captain is being detained for questioning in a federal investigation, Agent Torres explained, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the escalating chaos. Phillips looked alarmed. On what grounds? We have 300 passengers waiting to board this aircraft for the return flight. This is causing significant disruption. The disruption began when your captain destroyed a passenger's government-issued identification based solely on racial prejudice, Jasmine stated. Phillips turned to Reynolds. Is this true, Thomas? Before Reynolds could respond, Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, still clutching her USB drive. Mr. Phillips, it's all documented. Not just today, dozens of incidents. I've been reporting them internally for years. Phillips' expression darkened as he looked at the flight attendant. You've been collecting information on company personnel without authorization. I've been documenting civil rights violations that the company refused to address, Sarah corrected, standing her ground despite visibly trembling. After my third formal complaint was lost by HR, I realized I needed evidence. The tension was interrupted by Anthony Washington, who had remained on board and now approached the group. Daniel, he said, addressing the executive by name, you might remember me from the Aviation Law Symposium last year. I've already briefed your chief counsel on what I witnessed today. He's advised immediate cooperation with federal authorities. Phillips' confident demeanor faltered. You've spoken to Jerome? 20 minutes ago, Washington confirmed. He's on his way to Chicago now. Jasmine received a text from Carlos, media alerted. Story breaking. Corporate damage control initiating. Hold position. Indeed, through the windows, Jasmine could see news vans already arriving at the terminal. Word was spreading fast. Reynolds, seeing his support evaporating, changed tactics. His previously arrogant demeanor transformed into one of wounded confusion. This is all a misunderstanding, he insisted, addressing the gathering of passengers and staff. I was following security protocols. If Ms. Walker felt targeted, I sincerely apologize, but there was no racial component to my actions. Judge Montgomery scoffed audibly. You specifically said, and I quote, people like you often present fraudulent documentation. We all heard it, Captain. My words are being taken out of context, Reynolds protested. Which context would make that appropriate? Jasmine asked evenly. Reynolds ignored her, appealing instead to his colleagues. Brian, Sarah, you know me. I've flown thousands of flights without incident. Sarah looked down at the USB drive in her hand. I've documented 27 incidents involving you specifically, Captain Reynolds. 12 with black women in first class. 9 with Middle Eastern passengers. 6 with Hispanic families. Reynolds' face contorted with anger. You've been spying on me. That's grounds for termination. Retaliation against a whistleblower would compound your legal problems significantly, Jasmine advised the increasingly anxious MidAir executive. Phillips, recognizing the rapidly deteriorating situation, attempted damage control. Agent Walker, perhaps we could discuss this privately. I'm sure we can reach an understanding that addresses your concerns without further disruption. This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Phillips, Jasmine replied. This is a federal investigation that has been ongoing for months. Captain Reynolds' actions today are just the latest evidence in a pattern of discriminatory behavior that appears to be tolerated, if not encouraged, by MidAir's management. As she spoke, more FBI agents had arrived at the gate, creating a perimeter to manage the growing crowd of onlookers and media. Reynolds, seeing his chance of escape dwindling, made a desperate final attempt. This woman, he pointed at Jasmine, boarded my aircraft under false pretenses. She created this situation deliberately. How is that not entrapment? Captain Reynolds, Jasmine responded calmly, I boarded as a legitimate passenger with valid identification and a paid first-class ticket. I did nothing to encourage or induce your behavior. You chose to question my presence in first class. You chose to interrogate me without cause. You chose to destroy my identification. Those were your decisions, made freely, without provocation. Reynolds' face flushed deep red as he realized the trap he had walked into, not one set by the FBI, but one created by his own prejudice. Agent Torres, Jasmine said to her colleague, I believe we've caused enough disruption to MidAir's operations. Shall we continue this at the field office? Torres nodded. Captain Reynolds, you'll be coming with us for questioning. Mr. Phillips, we'll need you to provide all relevant personnel records and complaint histories by the end of the day. As Reynolds was finally escorted off the aircraft, the remaining passengers erupted into applause. Sarah Jenkins stood tall, years of silent complicity giving way to the relief of finally taking action. The co-pilot retreated to the cockpit, visibly shaken by the unfolding events. Jasmine followed the group toward the exit, but paused beside Judge Montgomery, who was gathering her belongings. Thank you for speaking up, Jasmine said quietly. Many wouldn't have. The elderly judge smiled. In my lifetime, I've seen too many people stay silent in the face of injustice. Never again, not while I have breath in my body. She patted Jasmine's hand. You've done good work today, Agent Walker. But I suspect your job is just beginning. As Jasmine stepped off the aircraft into the terminal, she was met by a wall of cameras and reporters. The story was breaking, and what had begun as a targeted investigation into one discriminatory pilot was rapidly expanding into something much larger, a reckoning that would reverberate throughout the entire airline industry. The MidAir discrimination case exploded across national news within hours. Shaky cell phone videos of Reynolds tearing Jasmine's ID played on continuous loops on cable news, while social media erupted with #FlyingWhileBlack hashtags and thousands of similar stories from minority passengers. 3 days after the flight, Jasmine sat in a conference room at the FBI Chicago field office, surrounded by evidence boards and case files. The investigation had expanded dramatically as hundreds of passengers came forward with their own experiences. We verified 47 incidents involving Reynolds specifically, Carlos reported, placing another file on the growing stack. But that's just the beginning. Sarah Jenkins' documentation implicates 12 other pilots and at least 3 regional managers who systematically dismissed complaints. Director Harrison entered the room, accompanied by the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, Sophia Patel. Agent Walker, Harrison said, MS. Patel is considering a broader case against MidAir. Your operation exposed far more than we anticipated. Patel, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, nodded. We're looking at pattern or practice discrimination charges against the corporation itself, not just individual employees. The evidence suggests institutional policies that enabled, and possibly encouraged, discriminatory behavior. Jasmine gestured to the evidence boards. Sarah Jenkins' documentation has been crucial. She meticulously recorded dates, flight numbers, names of passengers, and specific discriminatory actions. She also saved emails showing how complaints were systematically buried by management. Where is Ms. Jenkins now? Patel asked. Under protection, Carlos answered. MidAir placed her on administrative leave immediately after the incident, but we've secured whistleblower status for her. Harrison turned to Jasmine. The airline's CEO has requested a meeting with you personally. Apparently, he wants to understand your experience. Public relations damage control, obviously. I'll meet with him, Jasmine decided. But only with you and Ms. Patel present. Later that afternoon, in a sterile hotel conference room, Jasmine faced MidAir CEO Robert Kincaid and a team of executives and lawyers. Kincaid, a silver-haired man with an expensive suit and practiced smile, extended his hand as she entered. Agent Walker, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. What happened on that flight was inexcusable, and we want to make it right. Jasmine shook his hand firmly. Making it right would require systemic changes, Mr. Kincaid, not just addressing a single incident. Absolutely, Kincaid agreed too quickly. We've already terminated Captain Reynolds' employment and launched a comprehensive review of our training procedures. That's a start, Jasmine acknowledged, but our investigation suggests the problems go much deeper than one pilot. One of the corporate lawyers interjected smoothly. MidAir takes these allegations very seriously, but we believe they represent isolated incidents rather than systemic issues. Jasmine exchanged glances with Patel, who nodded slightly. Perhaps this will clarify things, Jasmine said, sliding a folder across the table. These are statistical analyses of passenger complaints filed against MidAir over the past 5 years, broken down by race, gender, and class of service. Kincaid opened the folder, his practiced smile faltering as he scanned the contents. The data shows black passengers in premium cabins are 27 times more likely to be questioned about their tickets, asked to move, or experience service denials, Jasmine continued. Middle Eastern passengers are subjected to random security checks at 19 times the rate of white passengers. Hispanic families are regularly separated during seating adjustments. These statistics could be interpreted various ways, another executive suggested weakly. They could, Patel agreed, speaking for the first time. But when combined with internal emails directing staff to maintain the premium experience by ensuring appropriate clientele in first class, the interpretation becomes quite clear. The color drained from Kincaid's face. What emails? In answer, Jasmine placed a USB drive on the table, a copy of Sarah Jenkins' documentation. Over 3 years of evidence showing how discrimination was not only tolerated but institutionalized within your airline's culture. The meeting continued for 2 more hours, evolving from MidAir's planned damage control exercise into a negotiation for a consent decree that would fundamentally transform the company's practices. As they were concluding, Kincaid asked the question that had clearly been bothering him. How did you choose our airline? Why MidAir specifically? We didn't choose you, Mr. Kincaid, Jasmine replied. Your customers did, through hundreds of complaints that revealed a pattern. MidAir isn't unique in having these problems, you're just the first to be held accountable for them. A week later, Jasmine sat across from Thomas Reynolds in an interrogation room. Gone was his captain's uniform and arrogant demeanor, replaced by a suit that seemed slightly too large and the nervous demeanor of a man facing serious charges. His attorney, a sharp-featured woman with calculating eyes, spoke first. My client is prepared to cooperate fully. He understands mistakes were made. Mistakes? Jasmine repeated. Is that what you call deliberate racial discrimination, Mr. Reynolds? A mistake? Reynolds couldn't meet her eyes. I was following what I understood to be company culture, he muttered. Company culture, Jasmine echoed. Did company culture instruct you to tear up a passenger's identification? That was an error in judgment. It was a federal offense, Jasmine corrected. One of several you committed that day. Reynolds' attorney leaned forward. What exactly are you offering in exchange for my client's cooperation? The opportunity to be on the right side of history, Jasmine replied. Mr. Reynolds can either be remembered as the face of discrimination in the airline industry, or as someone who helped expose and dismantle a broken system. Reynolds finally looked up, meeting Jasmine's gaze. They'll say I'm just saving myself. Some will, Jasmine agreed. But the truth is in the actions you take now. Your testimony can help ensure what happened to me, and to hundreds of others, doesn't continue. After a long moment, Reynolds nodded. I'll tell you everything. Not just about my actions, but about the training, the unwritten policies, the ways we were encouraged to maintain standards in premium cabins. Later that evening, Jasmine met Sarah Jenkins at a quiet restaurant away from media attention. The flight attendant looked both exhausted and relieved, the weight of years of silent witnessing finally lifted from her shoulders. I never thought anyone would believe me, Sarah confessed. Every time I reported an incident, it would disappear into the system. Eventually, I started documenting everything myself, but I didn't know what to do with it all. You did the right thing, Jasmine assured her. Your evidence has been invaluable. Sarah smiled sadly. I should have done more, sooner. I kept telling myself I was gathering evidence, but part of me was just afraid of losing my job, afraid of not being believed. That fear is by design, Jasmine said. Systems of discrimination rely on people being too intimidated to speak up. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now, Jasmine replied, we make sure your evidence leads to real change. As they parted ways, Jasmine received a text from Director Harrison. White House called. President wants briefing on airline discrimination case. This just went national. What had begun as an investigation into one discriminatory pilot had evolved into something much larger, a reckoning that would force an entire industry to confront its failings. And at the center of it all was the moment when a pilot had torn up a black woman's ID, never suspecting she was the FBI agent who would bring the whole system to account. 3 months after the fateful MidAir flight, Jasmine Walker stood before a congressional committee, her testimony the culmination of an investigation that had grown far beyond its original scope. The hearing room was packed with media, industry representatives, and civil rights advocates. Agent Walker, the committee chairwoman began, could you explain how your undercover operation evolved into this industry-wide investigation? Jasmine leaned toward the microphone. What began as an investigation into one airline revealed patterns that existed across the commercial aviation sector. After our initial findings became public, we received over 4,000 similar complaints spanning every major carrier in the country. The evidence had been overwhelming. MidAir was merely the most egregious example of a pervasive problem. Thomas Reynolds, once the proud captain who thought nothing of tearing up a black woman's identification, had become the first of many airline employees to face federal charges. The Department of Justice has filed charges against 17 individual airline employees and is pursuing consent decrees with 8 carriers, Jasmine continued. These agreements will require fundamental changes to hiring practices, training protocols, and complaint procedures. Reynolds himself had eventually provided crucial testimony about the unwritten rules and coded language used to maintain what airlines called the premium cabin experience, phrases that served as thin covers for systematic discrimination. He described receiving informal commendations for maintaining standards after incidents where he had removed minority passengers from first class, Jasmine explained to the committee. There was an understanding that certain passengers belonged in premium cabins while others did not, regardless of their paid tickets. After the hearing, Jasmine met privately with Sarah Jenkins, who had become an unlikely hero in the aviation community. Rather than being ostracized for her whistleblowing, Sarah had found support from colleagues who had witnessed similar discrimination but felt powerless to stop it. The airline offered me my job back, Sarah told Jasmine as they walked through the Capitol grounds. With a promotion to senior training manager, focusing on their new anti-bias program. Are you going to take it? Jasmine asked. Sarah nodded. I think I can do more good from the inside now. Things are actually changing. The new CEO has been surprisingly committed to the reforms. Indeed, MidAir had undergone a dramatic transformation in the months following the incident. After Robert Kincaid's resignation, the board had appointed Tanya Williams, a black woman with a background in both aviation and civil rights law, as the new CEO. Under her leadership, MidAir had become a model for the industry-wide changes now being implemented. That evening, Jasmine attended a reception hosted by the Congressional Black Caucus, where she found herself approached by Judge Patricia Montgomery, the elderly woman who had stood up for her on the flight. Agent Walker, the judge greeted her warmly. Or should I say Deputy Director Walker now? I hear congratulations are in order. Jasmine smiled. The promotion isn't official yet, but yes, I'll be heading the Bureau's new Civil Rights Enforcement Division. Well deserved, Judge Montgomery said approvingly. You've accomplished more in 3 months than most achieve in a career. While the public recognition was gratifying, the most meaningful moments for Jasmine came in private conversations with those who had been affected by airline discrimination. She had made a point of meeting with as many as possible, listening to their stories and ensuring they knew their experiences mattered. One such meeting had been with Darnell Johnson, a marketing executive who had been removed from 5 different first-class cabins over the years despite being a top-tier frequent flyer. "I just accepted it as the cost of being black in America," he told Jasmine. "I'd budget extra time for every trip, knowing I'd likely face some kind of challenge. After a while, you start doubting yourself, wondering if you're imagining things or being too sensitive." "You weren't," Jasmine assured him. "The data proves it wasn't in your head." The class action lawsuit against MidAir had grown to include over 800 plaintiffs, with Anthony Washington, the aviation attorney from the flight, serving as lead counsel. The airline had ultimately agreed to a historic settlement that included both monetary damages and commitments to structural changes. As the sun set over Washington, D.C., Jasmine found a quiet moment alone on the balcony of the reception venue. Director Harrison joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. "To making a difference," he toasted. Jasmine clinked her glass against his. "It doesn't always feel like enough," she admitted. "For every Thomas Reynolds who faces consequences, there are thousands who don't." "True," Harrison acknowledged. "But systems don't change overnight. What you did created a blueprint for holding institutions accountable. MidAir had become that blueprint." The airline had implemented comprehensive anti-bias training, created transparent complaint procedures with independent oversight, and established diversity requirements for hiring and promotion. Most significantly, they had instituted a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, backed by immediate consequences. Other airlines had followed suit, some voluntarily and others under legal pressure. The aviation industry, long a microcosm of America's racial hierarchies, was being forced to transform. 6 months after the incident, Jasmine returned to MidAir as a regular passenger, no undercover identity, no operation, just a woman taking a flight. She had been invited to speak at the airline's new training program, sharing her experience with incoming staff. As she boarded, she was greeted by a diverse flight crew who had no idea who she was, exactly as it should be. She settled into her first-class seat without question or incident, just another passenger entitled to the service she had paid for. Midway through the flight, she recognized Sarah Jenkins moving through the cabin, now wearing the stripes of a training supervisor. Their eyes met briefly, sharing a moment of recognition, not just of each other, but of how far things had come and how far they still had to go. The changes in the airline industry represented progress, but Jasmine harbored no illusions about the broader challenges of systemic racism. Her new position at the FBI would give her the authority to pursue similar investigations across different sectors: banking, housing, education, all areas where discrimination remained deeply entrenched. The work would continue, case by case, system by system. And while complete transformation might not come in her lifetime, Jasmine found purpose in moving the needle forward, creating spaces where people could exist with dignity, without having to prove they belonged. As her flight landed, Jasmine thought about Thomas Reynolds, who had recently begun serving his sentence. His downfall had come not from some elaborate sting operation, but simply from being confronted with a black woman who had the authority to hold him accountable. A reality he had never considered possible when he tore up her ID. Sometimes, justice looked like systemic change in congressional hearings. But sometimes, it looked like a moment of revelation, when a man who thought he had all the power suddenly discovered he had none at all. This story reveals powerful truths about confronting discrimination in America. First, documentation is crucial. Sarah's meticulous records and passengers' videos provided irrefutable evidence that couldn't be dismissed. Second, speaking up matters, even when it seems futile. Judge Montgomery and Anthony Washington demonstrated how bystanders can become powerful allies against injustice. The story also highlights how discrimination often hides behind policies and procedures, giving prejudice a veneer of legitimacy. Captain Reynolds believed his authority protected him while enforcing unwritten rules about who belongs in premium spaces. Most importantly, we see that systemic change requires both individual courage and institutional accountability. Jasmine's personal bravery, Sarah's years of documentation, and the legal consequences that followed created a blueprint for transformation. While one investigation couldn't eliminate racism entirely, it established that discriminatory practices can be identified, proven, and dismantled through coordinated action. The path to justice isn't instantaneous, but each step forward creates space for dignity and belonging that didn't exist before. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you knew how to respond? Share your experience in the comments. What would you have done if you were on that flight? If this story of justice resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful racism stories that need to be told, and share this video with someone who might need encouragement to speak up. Your voice matters in creating change. Thank you for watching, and remember, when we stand together against discrimination, we build a more just world for everyone.